Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is the Hypersonic 55 and I'm coming today with another film review, and today's review comes in the shape of Rise of the Planet of the Apes. Now strangely enough, Rise of the Planet of the Apes I've seen now 3 times, so you know what, a review just had to be done, and here it is. Okay, so the story of Rise of the Planet of the Apes happens to be a fairly interesting one. Here we happen to have Will Rodman, played by James Franco. He happens to be a scientist who thinks he's crafted a cure to Alzheimer's disease. So they test the drug out on chimpanzees to make sure that it works before they can try it out on humans. One chimp in particular happens to be reacting to the drug fairly well. However, through a series of events, that chimp is killed, but she happened to have an offspring. So Will takes the chimp back to his house and raises it as his own. And that chimpanzee happens to grow out to be a fairly efficient ape and happens to be the star of the movie, Caesar. Now Caesar as an ape happens to grow up more or less as a human, but learn through his walks in life that he happens to be fairly different from not only other humans, but also other apes as well. And later on in his life he happens to get into a dangerous incident, which happens to get him taken away from Will and put into a monkey sanctuary. And it is there that he happens to learn the cold reality of life through being locked up, treated like crap, and also learning about his own kind. And using his genetically enhanced mind and intelligence, he happens to gain the trust of the apes, and he happens to lead the apes in the sanctuary to freedom. And so that is just around the gist of the plot of Rise of the Planet of the Apes without going into the area of spoilers. Hopefully that was coherent enough for you to understand. Now, to be honest, from the point you go about and see the trailer, you more or less know exactly what the film is about. However, there are several moments within the film which go about and change things up a bit. Certain things you don't seem to expect happen to take place within the film, and you're just like, oh, I'm surprised they went about and gone down that route. And one of the main interesting things for me about the film is that while it's a reboot, it's also sort of a prequel that happens to have the foundations set upon it to go about and trace itself back into the original 5 Planet of the Apes films. And another interesting thing to note about the plot is that it's fairly similar to the film Conquest of the Planet of the Apes, which I think came out in the 1970s. But the story of Rise of the Planet of the Apes is very good. It's very touching, emotional, and surprisingly more interesting than a lot of the films that I've seen this summer. Okay, so let's move on to the cast of the film. Now, James Franco as Will Rodman was really good. When I saw him in the trailer for the film, I wasn't sure exactly what to expect from him. I know that he's a good actor, but I wasn't sure exactly whether this was the role for him. But he happened to hit the nail on the head fairly well. I happen to find his character fairly interesting, full of compassion and understanding as a father figure to Caesar. But he also happens to have the mind of a scientist, where most of his work he will obsess over just to make sure that the end result happens to work out. But he is also aware of the risks involved, and I thought that the role was good for him. But the real standout performance comes from Andy Serkis, who happened to play Caesar in the film. What he's done with Caesar in Rise of the Planet of the Apes is nothing short of amazing. We care more about Caesar in the film than we do about the humans in this film. Caesar happens to be a very interesting and emotive character, and happens to be one of the most badass geezers that I happen to see in the world of cinema for a while now. While we have all of our sort of badass men, it's not often that you happen to get emotionally attached to an ape in a film, but Andy Serkis has given so much life and commitment to the role that Caesar has just become a very, very interesting and wicked character in my opinion, and the rest of the cast in the film do admirable jobs in their roles as well. Now let's move on to the presentation of the film. Now when I happened to see the trailer of Rise of the Planet of the Apes, I happened to think, you know what, this film was all just going to be CG. There's not going to be anything real standing in front of those guys. It's just not going to be that good. But surprisingly enough, the digital effects created by Weta Digital are just amazing. Using the power of motion capture and some well-crafted CGI in such a realistic fashion that it's almost impossible at certain points in the film to tell whether you're looking at CG-based apes or whether you're looking at a real ape right there and then. The motion capture is just incredible, and it is depicted in such a fabulous fashion that one can't complain about the visuals in the film. It is really, really good. Also, the music crafted by Patrick Doyle, who some of you guys may know as the film composer for Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, and more recently Thor, that came out earlier this year, is very, very good. His film score for Rise of the Planet of the Apes is wonderful, full of a lot of emotional and dramatic scenes, and it happens to hit all the right notes at the right times, with a lot of good use of instruments, especially with the drums in the scene as well. It's very good. It's very good. And one other interesting thing about Rise of the Planet of the Apes is that there happens to be one sequence where Caesar happens to be climbing a good number of trees, and it happened to remind me a lot of the Disney adaptation of Tarzan, when Tarzan happens to be in his older state, climbing and swinging through trees and stuff like that. And it just happened to be a neat little reference that I happened to find in the film, which made me smile. Now, for all the good points that I happen to make about the film, there are a few things that stop the movie from being, like, one of the most amazing films in existence. Firstly, there are a few issues I have with the pacing of the movie. Certain points, things seem to slow down a little too much for my liking. Also, certain secondary characters in the film I don't feel are utilized as much as they could be, especially with Frida Pinto's character and Mr. Draco Malfoy. In the end, there's certain things that took place in the film that I just sort of wanted to be a little bit more action-packed or work out in a slightly different way than it did in the film. But again, that's just me nitpicking, really. So overall, Rise of the Planet of the Apes happens to be a surprisingly good summer movie. It's definitely a lot better than some of the films I've seen recently, and it is littered with great performances, some amazing visuals, a good soundtrack, and a surprisingly interesting hero in the shape of an ape. So overall, I'd give Rise of the Planet of the Apes about an 8.5 out of 10. The film was good, though with a few pacing issues and a few things that didn't turn out the way I would like them to. It happens to just slightly slide down a little bit, but I'd still say that 8.5 is a good rating. Go see Rise of the Planet of the Apes. I assume you will be thoroughly impressed with what you see. So this has been my review, ladies and gentlemen. Hopefully you found it informative, and if you didn't like it, then, I'm sorry. I will do better the next time. So until then, this is me, the Hypersonic 55, signing out.